friends, welcome to Love and Life's Journey. I'm Chantel, and today I have a mega video counting down my top 20 DIYs of 2020. Let's get started. My inspiration for this project is this Windmill Shelf from Overstock.com. For $94, I certainly didn't want to pay that, so I'm going to recreate it for less. I'm going to be using this little windmill garden decor piece from Dollar Tree. And I'll be using 2 packages of these bamboo skewers. And there are 12 in a package, and these are the ones that are 32 inches long. These are from Dollar Tree as well. And I picked up 2 packages of these 5-gallon paint stir sticks from Walmart. And the last thing I'll be using is this sign from Dollar Tree that I picked up back around Valentine. For each leg, I will be using 3 skewers. And I'm first going to use a little bit of hot glue in between 2 of the skewers, just in a few places, 3 or 4 places, just to hold them together. Then I'm going to use some wood glue and just put a bead of that all along the skewers, right in between, just kind of in the seam between those 2 skewers. And then I'm going to place the 3rd skewer on top of those. Then I'm going to wrap some rubber bands around these in about 4 places all along the skewers to hold them together while that wood glue dries. So I'm going to repeat this process until I have all 4 legs for my windmill, and so I will be using all 12 of the skewers in one of those packages. And I'm going to save these little galvanized hearts for another project, and it doesn't matter if this sign, the paper on the sign, gets torn a little bit trying to get the glue off, because we're going to cover that up anyway. So I'm just removing the staples that hold the ribbon on, and I'm going to remove that. I will be covering these using these paint stir sticks, but I do need to prep these a little bit. So I'm going to take a piece of sandpaper and just take off the glitter on this one sign and get this nice and smooth, and just remove that so that the glue will adhere to this really well. And I am using some wood glue for this. I'm just putting a generous amount on and then laying the paint stir sticks on this, and 3 paint stir sticks fit perfectly on this sign, which is why I decided to go with this. And I'm just lining it up with one end, and they will hang over on one end, and that's fine because once they're dry we're going to cut them off. And then I will just place a really heavy book on this and let it dry. And I'm going to repeat the same process with the other part of that sign as well. Now that the legs are dry, I'm going to remove all of the rubber bands, and again, being careful of splinters. Next, I'm going to measure and mark at 24 inches from the flat side of each of the dowel legs. And so this is how long I want the legs to be, and I'm going to cut off the end with the points and not use that. To cut these, I am using a miter box and saw, and I will put the link to this in the description box below. This is a great tool to have for craft projects. If you have a table saw or a different kind of saw, you can use that, but I just find this is really nice to use for smaller craft projects. So here I have my 4 legs. Next, I'm going to mark where I want to place the supports that are going to hold my shelves. So I have 2 of the legs sitting side by side, and I am measuring up 4 inches on each one and marking that. And for the supports, I am going to be using some of these craft sticks. They're by Crafter's Square, and I picked these up at Dollar Tree. So it's really important to make sure the shelf is going to fit in between the legs. So I'm using that as the spacer so that I know how far apart the legs need to be. And then I will use some wood glue and a little bit of hot glue to glue these craft sticks in place, but before I do, I want to snip off the ends of the sticks, the rounded ends, because I don't want them to look like popsicle sticks or craft sticks. So I'm just using some wire cutters and snipping off the ends. So here I'm just putting a little dab of wood glue on, and then I will put a little bit of hot glue to hold that on. And then just place it right along where I put those marks, making sure that it's even, and you want to make sure that it all looks square. Next I'm going to mark where I want to place my second shelf, and so I am going to measure down 10 inches from the opposite end of where we just placed the other craft sticks, and mark on each leg 10 inches down. Again, I am placing the shelf in between so that I have that spacing correct. I'll add the wood glue and a little bit of hot glue and place another craft stick. Then I'm going to flip my piece over, and I am going to place a craft stick on the opposite side, basically in the same location, and this is just going to make it more sturdy. So I'm just doing the same process. I didn't mark these out because I could just see where I needed to put them. So again, I'm adding the wood glue and hot glue and placing a craft stick on the opposite side. So it's kind of sandwiching those legs in between the craft sticks. Then I'm going to repeat this process, so I have another identical piece. They go 4 inches up on the bottom, 10 inches down on the top, and these two pieces are going to be the sides that go together to make the legs of my windmill. Then I'm going to take those two pieces and 2 additional skewers, and I am going to spray paint them black. And if you want to use chalk paint or acrylic paint to paint these, you can do that. I just thought that spray paint would be faster, so that's what I'm using. So I didn't show it, but I did use my miter box and saw to cut off the paint stir sticks where they hang over the sign. And now I am measuring over 4 inches, and I am going to cut down only one of my shelves. The other one will stay the length that it was, but this one I am going to cut at 4 inches. And I'm just going to take a piece of sandpaper and sand off any little splinters or rough edges. So here are the measurements of the shelves. The first one is just the length of that original sign, about 13¼ inches, and the second one is about 9�3/8 inches, and that's just what was left after I cut off the 4-inch piece. I'm going to take some chalk paint in the color of ink. This is Waverly chalk paint that I got at Walmart, and I'm going to very carefully paint the edges of my shelves. I want to leave the paint stir sticks the natural color. You could stain them or paint them if you want to, but I'm leaving mine natural, so I'm being really careful not to get any paint on it. Then once the edges are all dry, I am going to paint the backs of these with the ink colored chalk paint. I think this will just give it a more finished store-bought look. Then it's time to start assembling this windmill shelf, and this is when it really starts coming to life. So the smaller 4-inch piece is what's going to go on the top, and I am placing it with the wood grain or the paint stir sticks facing up, and I am going to glue the tops of the legs to this. And so the 4-inch piece is going to kind of sit inside of the legs, and the legs are going to glue to the outside corners of that top piece. And before I glue anything, I kind of lay it all out, and this is a little tricky. It's kind of one of those things where you need 6 hands, but just work with it and you can get it taken care of. So I place that top piece in between the legs, and then I'm going to lay my bottom shelf in there so I can see how far apart I need to spread the legs and at what angle they need to be before I glue them. Once I have my shelves all glued in, then I'm going to take those two skewers that I painted black, and I am going to put some little crossbars on the back of my shelf. I'm going to remove the hanger from the back of this little windmill and also remove the bell. I wasn't sure that the hot glue was going to stick to the metal as well, so I did use a combination of the hot glue with a stronger glue. Here's the finished shelf. I love how this came out, and I saved so much money by doing it myself. I'd just like to give a shout out to Heidi at Heidi Ensemble DIY and Leonette from DIY Beauty on Purpose for putting together this collaboration. Be sure to check out the links to their channel as well as the playlist in the description box below. And now on to the next DIY. For this, I will be using one of the mason jar cutout signs from Dollar Tree. I usually carry these during the fall, but I have seen them in different seasons as well. I'm also going to be using chalkboard paint. This is from Rust-Oleum. I picked this up at Home Depot for $5. I think you can get it at any craft store and also at Walmart. I will also be using this Rust-Oleum metallic aluminum colored spray paint, as well as some Waverly chalk paint in the color Elephant. This is just a dark gray paint. You could use an acrylic paint, and a lighter gray acrylic paint as well. I'm going to start by removing the hanger on this. I won't be using this, so I'm just going to cut it off. I am going to use the back of the sign for the chalkboard because it is smoother. Now when I painted this side, it soaked up the paint more, and so I had to do 3 or 4 coats of the paint on this. I also noticed the finish was a little rough, so I'm going to take some 240 grit sandpaper, this is real fine sandpaper, and just lightly go over the surface just to smooth it out. And this worked really well, and it was easy to do, and then I just went back and sprayed one more coat of the chalkboard paint over the top. And once that is dry, I'm going to tape off where the lid part would be, and I'm going to also cover the rest of it with some newspaper just to protect it so that all that is showing is the lid. Then I'm going to spray paint that using that metallic aluminum spray paint. Now I want to make the lid look galvanized, so I'm going to use the Elephant colored Waverly chalk paint, and I'm going to use kind of a fluffy old brush, and I'm just going to pounce this dark gray paint all over on top of that metallic aluminum paint, and then I will also go in with a little bit of the lighter gray paint, and I'm just building layers here, trying to give it some depth and make it look like it's galvanized metal. And so I just kind of alternate back and forth between the Elephant colored chalk paint, or the dark gray, and the light gray, and then I also decided to add a little bit of the black acrylic paint in here as well, just to give it a little bit more depth. I'm going to use a chalk marker. You can pick these up at Dollar Tree, and I am going to again put those lines around the outside edge of the jar, and it shows up better on the chalkboard, but I decided to use the marker just because I've found they don't come off as easily as just chalk, and I thought it would be easier than painting them on, so that's why I used it. So here you'll notice I painted the opposite side with a light blue color, dry brushed it with some dark gray, and then added a monogram letter to it just so this sign is reversible. And now I am adding some jute twine. I wrapped it around the top about 5 times. Then I'm just going to tie a bow. And I put a bow on this side, and then I also decided to add a little bit of embellishment to the other side, which I'll show you in a minute. I'm going to use some wire. You can pick this package up at Dollar Tree, or you can get it at any hardware store, or even Walmart. And I'm just using the same holes that the original hanger for this sign was in, and I'm going to just twist my wire once I put it through the hole just to secure that, and I'll do that on both ends. I decided that the chalkboard side needed a little bit of an embellishment as well, so I'm going to wrap the jute twine around my hand about 4 times, and then I will cut another little piece of twine just to tie around the center to make a little bit of a bow. And I add a little bit of hot glue in there just to help secure that, because I cut the ends of that knot pretty short, so just to keep it from coming apart. And then I'm going to glue that onto the twine up by the lid. And that's it. My chalkboard sign is finished, and I really like how it turned out. It was so inexpensive to make. It's easy to write on, and it's also easy to erase. I think this would be so cute to have in your kitchen to write your menu on for the day, or just to put a cute little saying like this one on. For this next DIY, I'm going to be using 2 of these dish drying mats that I picked up at Dollar Tree. And I love this pattern. I love these colors. And I'm going to be using 1 package of the white decorative nautical rope. This is the newer rope that they have been carrying. First, I'm going to remove the tags off of these. They just tear right off. And I am making a bag out of these, and I decided that I wanted the pattern side on the outside of both sides of my bag. So I'm putting the right sides together on this, and I am going to show this making it with my hot glue gun. However, I would recommend if you sew that you sew it, and if you know how to sew, then you don't need me to show you because you already know how to sew this. Really simple. Just going to sew around the outside edges. But for this, I am actually going to be putting it together with my hot glue gun, which actually worked fairly well. I'm not sure how long this bag will last using the hot glue gun, so I do recommend sewing. And I'm just running a bead of hot glue down the edge of this and then pressing it down so that it gets sealed tightly. Then once the glue has completely cooled and is set, then I am going to turn this right side out, and then you'll be able to see the shape of my bag. And I actually got this idea because these drying mats are very absorbent, and I thought this might make a really good beach bag. I have a grommet kit that I am going to be using for this, and I will link a similar one in the description box below. I couldn't find this exact one, but you can get these for between, like, I don't know, $8 to $15 for a kit, and I've had this for a really long time and have used it for a lot of projects. So you will be able to use it for a lot of different things. So I'm going to measure over, I went over about 3.5 inches and just down the width of my ruler and made a mark, and that is where I'm going to be placing my grommet. I'm going to do this on each side, on both sides of the bag, so I'll be doing 4 grommets. Then I'm going to take a sharp pair of scissors and I'm going to cut just a little cross right on that dot that I marked. I don't want to make the hole too big because I want it to just fit the grommet, and so I'm just making a small hole so that I can push that grommet through there. So the way this works is I am going to set my wooden block down, and then I'm going to put the one little metal piece that the grommet sits in, like this, and I think it's easier to push it through the fabric and then set it on the little holder, but you can do however works well for you. And you want this just to fit tight in that hole, and make sure you get the right side of the grommet on the right side of your bag. Once you have the front side of the grommet through, then you're going to place the back side of the grommet over that, set it on the little base, and then you're going to use the punching tool, and just that fits right down into the hole, and then you're going to pound that several times with a hammer, and I found this works best on a concrete floor. And that's all there is to setting a grommet, and now we have a nice hole to put our handles through. I've learned that this rope frays pretty badly when you cut it, so I am taking my hot glue gun and pushing it in between the strands of the rope and inserting some glue in the center and holding it together tightly, and that way when I cut it, it really reduces the amount of fraying. And I basically took the whole strand of rope and I cut it in half so that I had 2 handles, each about 3 foot 3 inches long. And once I cut my rope, if there were any stray or fraying ends, I just added a little bit more hot glue to glue those down. Then I'm going to thread my rope through the inside and tie a knot on the outside of the bag to hold the handle on. And again, if there were any stray strings, I just hot glued them down so they were secure. And then I did the same thing with the other handle on the other side, and I made sure before I tied my knots to make sure my handles were the same length. So here's my finished bag. I think this would be great to take to the beach or the pool because those drying mats are really absorbent. If you are new to my channel, I would love to have you stick around for lots more DIYs to come. Just hit that subscribe button as well as the bell to set your notifications so that YouTube will notify you whenever there's a new video. For this next project, I will be using this 14-inch round sign and also the galvanized stars from this tag-shaped sign. Both of these signs I picked up at Dollar Tree. As well as some decorative nautical rope and also one of these patriotic bows. And to paint my sign, I'm just using some navy blue craft paint. First, I'm going to remove the stickers off of the back of my sign, and if the stickers are hard to get off, a trick I always use is my heat tool, or you could even use a hairdryer to heat it up, and then they just peel off super easy. I'm going to remove the little jute hanger that it came with because I'll be putting a different type of hanger on, and then I will be filling that hole with just a little bit of hot glue so that I can just paint over it. Then I'm going to take my paint and I'm going to paint both sides and the edges of this, and it pretty much takes 2 coats to get a nice coverage on this. Sorry guys, I'm a messy crafter. It's a good thing that this paint just cleans up with water. And you don't have to paint both sides of the sign. I just decided to give it a nice finished look. Once the paint is dry, I'm going to take some chalk paint in the color ivory, and you can use any light white or ivory colored craft paint for this, and I'm going to just dry brush a little bit of this over the top of the sign just so it's not so much of a solid blue color, but so that it gives it a little bit of a worn look. And so just get a little bit of paint on a dry paintbrush, wipe off any of the excess, and then just lightly brush it across the sign. Next, I decided what I wanted my sign to say, and I printed that out using Microsoft Word and my printer. I just picked a font that I like and sized it so it would fit, and so this is what I'm going to use for my pattern. If you have a Cricut or a silhouette that you want to cut out vinyl lettering to put on your sign, that would save you time and would be a great way to do this as well. Since I'm going to transfer my pattern onto a dark color, I'm using white chalk on the back side of the pattern, and I'm just coloring over that, and then I will place that onto my sign and trace over it with a pencil, and this will transfer the chalk onto my sign so that I can see where I need to paint my words. Then I'm going to use more of that ivory chalk paint and a small paintbrush and just paint my word on my sign. So now I'm going to take some of that decorative nautical rope and I am going to hot glue that all around the outside edge of the circle. So the bow from Dollar Tree comes with just a little gold twisty tie around the center that is basically holding the bow together. And I'm going to remove that and replace it with a piece of jute twine just so it looks more cohesive with the whole project. Next, I'm going to use a putty knife and just remove those galvanized stars off of the tag sign, and they just pop off really easily. And of course, I will save that sign to use for another project. Now I'm going to hot glue that bow to the top of the sign and then hot glue the stars just randomly wherever I think they look good. And then to finish off the sign, I'm going to take a piece of jute twine, tie a knot at each end, and hot glue that on the back. My next project is this Easter egg wreath. For this I will be using one of these wreaths from Dollar Tree. They call it a bamboo wreath, but it doesn't really look like bamboo to me, but this will be perfect for this project. I'll also be using 3 packages of the speckled eggs from Dollar Tree, as well as 2 packages of these smaller styrofoam eggs. And to finish it off, I'll be using this Easter garland I picked up at Hobby Lobby. It was on sale for $1.79. And then I will also be using some of the leaves or greenery from this floral stem from Dollar Tree. So first I am going to take my larger speckled eggs and I am going to glue them around the wreath, just spacing them fairly equally and kind of turning them in different directions. And I actually did 6 of the larger eggs at a time, and then I filled in with some of the smaller eggs, and I was just trying to make sure that I had enough eggs to go all the way around the wreath. So you can see here that I'm just pulling the little ribbons out of the top of those little egg ornaments, and they just come out really easy, and then I'm hot gluing them on the wreath as well. And I felt like 3 packages of those large eggs was just perfect for this wreath, and then I actually did have a few of the smaller eggs left over, but I used most of them. I just had a couple left over. Next I'm going to take that Easter garland and I'm going to secure it on the back of the wreath, and then I'm going to wrap it very loosely around the wreath, and I just kind of bend it and twist it. I think this just really adds a whimsical touch to this wreath. And then for my last step, I'm going to cut off some of the little sprigs of greenery off of this floral stem, and then I am going to just place them around the wreath, and there's not a lot of them, but it's just enough just to fill in a few of those blank spaces and just give it a higher end look. And I'm loving how this wreath is looking. I saw one in Hobby Lobby that was selling for $30, and even at 40% off, you're paying close to $20, and I spent less than $10 to make this one. For this, I am using the heart chalkboard sign from Dollar Tree. And in my after Christmas haul, I picked up these scarves in the Christmas clearance. They were 50 cents each, but they are perfect for Valentine's. So I'm going to be using 3 of these. And then I'm going to be using one of the galvanized metal words. This is actually not a word, but I'm using the XOXO for hugs and kisses out of this package that has love, XOXO, and Valentine in it. The first thing I'm going to do is tie my 3 scarves together in a knot at one end. Then I'm going to use some painter's tape and tape that knot down to my table just to secure it, and then I'm going to start braiding my scarves together. Now, I didn't do this super tight, but I didn't do it really loose either. I wanted a good size braid, so I didn't braid them too tightly, but I wanted it tight enough so that it was pretty even looking and that it would stay together nicely. Once I have the scarves braided all the way to the end, I'm just going to use a binder clip to clip them together to hold it. You could use a rubber band or hair tie or whatever's handy. I'm going to remove the ribbon that came on this sign. It just doesn't quite go with the colors, so I'm removing it and I will be replacing it once I'm finished with my sign. So now I'm going to glue the braid around the heart, and I like the chalkboard sign, but I'm not real crazy about the glitter border, so that's why I came up with this way to cover that up, and I think it looks so cute and just adds some really cool texture to this. So I'm just using my hot glue gun, and I am just covering up that red glitter using my braided scarves. Before I completely glue the end of the braid down, I'm going to cut off the knot that we used at the very beginning to tie the scarves together, and then I will secure that end with some hot glue to make sure it doesn't come apart. Then I'm going to continue gluing the braid the rest of the way around the heart. When I get to the end, I'm going to separate the 3 scarves, and I'm going to take the 2 scarves that are on either side and tie them around the middle scarf that's hanging down there. Then I'm going to add some hot glue to that middle scarf and secure it to the knot, and then trim off the excess. Then, because the knot is a little bit floppy, I'm going to secure it to the chalkboard with just a little bit more hot glue. Now, if you like this look, you could leave the ends hanging down, and it doesn't give you much room to write on the chalkboard, but it's cute just the way it is. Or you can finish it off by looping each end around and gluing it behind the bow, just to secure those ends, and then it just looks like you have a big full bow at the top. Next, I'm going to add the little metal accent word, or my XOXO. I'm gluing it to the bottom side edge down by the point of the heart. You could put this anywhere you want. You could put it across the top of the bow. You could put it in the center of the heart if you don't really want to use it as a chalkboard, but just as a sign. And it's just really whatever your preference is. And now I'm going to add a hanger back onto this heart. So I'm just hot gluing it into the holes that are already on this heart. And here it is, all finished. I think it turned out so cute. My inspiration for this next project was this cotton stem floral arrangement that I saw on Etsy, and I'm going to recreate it for just a couple of dollars. First I went outside and cut some sticks off of some branches that my dad, who lives next door, trimmed off of his trees. Then I gathered my other supplies, which include some cotton balls. I'm using the jumbo size cotton balls. And to make 12 cotton stems, I used 2 sheets of 12 by 12 cardstock, one in dark brown and one in light brown. Next I cut out a pattern for the burrs out of a manila file folder. You could just use cardstock for this. And I actually got the idea, or kind of the how-to of how to make these, from a website called renovatedfaith.com. I will put the link in the description box below, and she has a pattern for this you can download. I just made my own, but I cut out 12 of these out of the dark colored cardstock and 12 out of the light colored cardstock. This step was my own touch that I added. I crinkled these up several times. So I crinkled it up and then I flattened it back out and then I crinkled it up again, and I thought this just really helped make it look more realistic. And the suggestion on the website was when you were finished to spray these with hairspray, and it kind of gave them a little bit more realistic look. I didn't find that to be true, so I came up with this, and I really like how this looks. And I'm going to do this with all of these pieces that I cut out. Then I took a lighter colored piece and put it on top of a darker colored one, and I poked a hole through the center, and then I used my hot glue gun to glue these together. Really, I think you should glue them first and then put the hole in it. You don't want to glue it in the center though, because that's where you're going to put your hole. I'm gluing just 1 or 2 petals at a time, because while the hot glue is still warm, you want to kind of curl those in toward the center, and you'll see how I'm doing that. And as the glue cools, then it kind of holds that shape. Next I'm going to take 4 cotton balls and I'm just going to glue them together with some hot glue in just kind of a square. Then I'm going to take my stick, and this one has kind of a wide end on it, so I'm just going to break that off and then poke that through the hole in the burr in that paper piece that I made. And I'll hot glue that onto the stick, and then I will add some extra hot glue and glue the cotton balls into the center of that. And then I just hold it in place until the glue has all set. Now this stick had this little extra piece, so I thought this would be great to add a smaller little cotton bowl to. So I am just cutting out a little bit smaller paper pieces, and I'm going to do the same process where I crinkle them up and glue them together, and I'll just be using 1 cotton ball for this little branch that's on my stick. Most of my sticks did not have this little extra piece, but I thought this was a real nice addition to this one, and I had a couple other sticks that I did this with as well, but most of them just had the one on it. So my inspiration piece had a galvanized bucket, and I had this one from Dollar Tree, but it was way too shiny. I liked the other one. The original one had more rust in it. So I also have this one from the Dollar Tree, and so I am going to use my galvanized painting technique on this, and hopefully it will look galvanized with a little bit more rust in it. I will be using this metallic silver paint from Folk Art, as well as this elephant colored chalk paint by Waverly. And then I'm using just a lighter colored craft paint. This is, I think, Apple Barrel from Walmart. I'm going to start with the metallic paint, and I will be using kind of a fluffier brush. This is a brush that I don't care that much about, so this is hard on your brush, so just keep that in mind. And I'm going to dip that in my paint and get a little of the excess paint out of it, and then I am basically going to just be stippling this all over my container and just twisting my brush and turning it in different ways. I do not want to cover up all of that rusty color because I want that to show through like there are rusty spots on my bucket. Once I've done a coat of the metallic silver, I'm going to move on to the elephant colored chalk paint. This is a darker gray, almost charcoal color, and I'm going to be doing the same thing. And again, I do not want to cover up all of that rust color. So basically I am building just layers of different shades of the gray and silver paint on this until I have a look that I like. After the elephant colored paint, I'm going to move on to the lighter colored gray paint. And I don't clean my brush in between these colors of paint because I don't care if they mix together or not. They're all kind of blending together on the bucket anyway. And so then after I do the lighter gray, then I am going to go back in and cover up some of that lighter color with the dark gray elephant colored paint too. And then I'm also going to be adding a little bit more of the metallic silver. And really this is just your preference, how much you like, if you want it darker or lighter, if you want more of the shiny metallic, if you want more of the rust color, it's really up to you. Next, I'm going to take some floral foam from Dollar Tree and put that in the bottom of the bucket. And then I'm going to just start pushing my cotton stems down into the bucket and arranging them to just what I think looks nice. Then I'm going to add some Spanish moss around those stems to hide the floral foam. And then I'm going to also use some of these lamb's ear picks that I picked up at Walmart. They were 98 cents each. And I think this just really fills it in and completes it. My next project is this pair of wall sconces that I created from those wire football wreath forms from Dollar Tree. And I'm going to be covering these with some jute twine, and you can get twine at Dollar Tree, but I am going to be using quite a bit of it, so I have a larger roll that I picked up at Walmart. And I'll also be using some foam core board, and this is available at Dollar Tree as well. First I'm going to use a good pair of wire cutters, and I'm going to cut the football wreath form in half. I'm going to cut each one of those wires right along that center line. And this will give me one half that has that top rim around it. And this is going to be the piece that I'm going to use for my wall sconce. Next I'm going to take one of the halves of the football form, and it doesn't matter which one, and I'm going to trace that on the foam core board. And this is just to give me the shape of this so that I can cut it out and use that as a backing on my wall sconce. I also set the sconce up on the end and I'm going to trace around it. This one I had already put twine on, and I'm actually tracing on the inside of the sconce to give me that size. You can trace around the outside just to give you the shape and then cut it out a little bit smaller, and you'll see what this is for in a little while. So now I'm just using a razor knife to cut out those foam board pieces, and I'm making 2 sconces, so I have 2 of the backs and 2 of the tops. And when I placed it on the back, I noticed it was a little bit tall, so I'm just trimming off a little off of the top edge so that that foam board will not show when it's hanging on the wall. Then I'm going to use some spray paint by Rust-Oleum. This is color Nutmeg, and I chose this because it is the same color as the twine, and that way that green from the wreath form will not show. And then I also sprayed one side of my foam board pieces. This next step is a little time consuming, so I recommend just putting on a good movie and just enjoy yourself while you're working on it. And so I'm going to take a little bit of the jute twine off of the roll because the roll is too big to fit in between the sections of the wreath form. And then I'm going to secure that end of the twine on the back side with a little bit of hot glue. Then just to cover up the frame on the very bottom, I am going to hot glue a strand of twine just along that outside edge, and that will cover that up. Then I'm going to start weaving the twine over and under those vertical wires of the form. And this can be a little bit challenging down at the bottom because there's not a lot of room to work with to put that twine through those sections. But I found if I just kind of worked with it one section at a time, pulled it through, instead of trying to put that whole bunch of twine, I found that that worked better. And so once you get that through, then you just work it down, and you want to push each row of twine down tight against the next one. And this does get easier as you work up the form because you have a little bit more space in each of those sections to work with. Now once I get that bottom half done, and there's that horizontal wire that goes across the center, I am going to take a piece of twine. I'm just using the end of the piece that I was using, and I'm going to glue it across the center. Instead of weaving it, it's just going to be glued on top of that wire so that it will conceal that center wire. And once I'm finished with all of the weaving of the jute twine, you really don't even notice that this one strand is not woven in. And then I'll just secure that on the back side, and I will continue on. Now if you have a long piece of jute twine still left that you're working with, then you can just continue weaving just like you were. Up at the top of the sconce, I am pushing all of my rows down as far as I can to continue adding as many rows as I can because I want this to be a pretty tight weave. I don't want the light to show through this, and so I am adding several more rows than it really looks like there's room for here. But it's pretty easy just to push those rows down and then continue weaving. And then I'm going to glue one strand of jute along that top wire to conceal it as well, just like I did with that center wire. So now I'm going to add the back on this, and I'm actually going to put it on with the white side facing the back because I want the brown to be on the inside of the sconce. And I'm just hot gluing this to the back so that it has just a flat back. And I know some of you are wondering why I didn't paint both sides, but I didn't paint them because I'm going to be using some command strips to hang these up, and I didn't want to stick the command strips to the painted side. I wanted it to stick directly to the foam board. So this is our bedroom, and I felt like I needed something on either side of that wall art piece for a while now, so that is what I'm going to do. And here you can see I have the command strip. These are the Velcro command strips. I have one in the center, and these are rated to hold 4 pounds, and the sconces are much less than that. So here is the finished pair of sconces with some greenery in it. I just put some eucalyptus from Walmart in each one, and I really like how this looks. I like the greenery, the color that it brings, and I think these look amazing. So remember that piece that I cut out of the foam board that I traced the top of the sconce and then we painted it as well? Well, now I'm going to show you how I use that to actually turn these into an actual light. I'm going to trim around this a little bit because it is a little bit too big to fit down inside, and so I'm just trimming off about 1/4 of an inch using my razor knife. Then I'm going to take this piece and I am going to put it down inside the sconce so that it is about, I would say, 3 inches down inside, and this is going to make a little shelf for our light to sit on. And I am not even going to glue this in. It just pushes down inside and is really snug and tight in there, and so this will make a great little shelf to put one of those little puck lights, and you can get them at Dollar Tree. I actually ordered some off of Amazon, and I will link those in the description box below because I really like the features that they have. And I would recommend taking them out to turn them on and then putting them in, because if you try to push down, you might push that foam board out of place. Lights that I ordered came with a remote control, and because these are up above my bed, that's why I decided to get these. They actually also change colors, but I didn't really care so much about that as having the remote. These came in a set of 3 with the remote for about $12, and I really like how these look. I love the accent lighting that it just gives a little bit of warmth to our bedroom, and I think that they're really pretty. I picked up 4 of the little plastic Christmas Village houses from Dollar Tree, and I tried to get all different styles. Honestly, these are the only 4 that they had in stock at my Dollar Tree, and so these are the ones I picked. I also grabbed 4 of the unfinished wood chunky ornaments from the Crafter's Square aisle. If you don't have these available, you can use any block of wood. I also grabbed 4 bags of the clear glass beads or marbles. Either one will work. And I picked up some hooks from Walmart. This is a 6-pack of coat hooks, and I believe it was about $7 for this package. I'll be using some white spray paint, and I chose this one because it says it bonds to plastic, and I think this will work great on those houses. I'm also going to be using some black chalk paint, and I'm going to use some E6000 as well as my hot glue gun with some Gorilla Glue sticks. First, I am going to spray paint my houses with the white spray paint, and I am doing several light coats. It actually took me 3 to 4 coats of paint to cover all the color and to get in all of the little grooves and everything on the buildings. So this takes a little bit of time because you want to let your paint dry in between each coat. So while I'm waiting for my paint to dry in between each coat of paint, I'm going to prep the bases, and so I'm going to remove the hanger off of those ornaments, and I am going to cut one side of these to be flat since they're kind of scalloped. I need one edge to be straight so that I can attach the hook for my stocking, and I lucked out because these barely fit inside my miter box, and so I was able to push them down into the miter box and use this to cut them. If you have a different way to cut these, then by all means use what's easiest for you, but this did work for me, and so I'm just going to cut all of the bases to have this one straight side. Then I'm going to take a piece of sandpaper and I'm rounding off the corners where I just sawed off that edge just to make them a little more of a softer edge, and then I'm sanding any rough edges and just getting it all smooth and ready to paint. Next I'm going to fill the holes, and I am using hot glue, and a trick I use is to set the hole on a metal surface like a metal ruler, and then I'm filling the hole with the hot glue, and I just hold that down tight until the glue sets. Then when I pull that off of the ruler, I have a nice smooth surface, and the glue hasn't seeped out anywhere or made a rough surface. So that is a trick that I use, and you can use wood filler if you'd like to fill the hole with that, but I find this to be a pretty easy way to do it. Then I'm going to paint my bases, all the front, the back, the sides, all with my black chalk paint. So my houses are all painted and the paint is dry, and I think it was pretty much 4 coats of paint that I had to use. And one thing I did not notice until after I had painted them white is that this one is crooked. The base of it is not down all the way, and it's not something that I can fix. It's just the way it was made. So the house sits a little bit crooked. I probably will go get a replacement if I can find one, but something to watch out for. So now I'm using just an old paintbrush, and I'm going to dry brush some of the black chalk paint on some areas of the houses. I'm going to hit all of the corners and the edges and a few of the raised areas and just some various places on the roofs, just to give them a little bit more of an aged look. And this will also break up the white and bring out the details of each building. So now that everything is painted, I'm going to take those clear glass marbles and beads, and I'm going to fill up the houses with these. And it's really easy because there's already a hole in the bottom where you would put like a tea light, like LED tea light, but I'm just going to fill these up, And I chose the clear because I didn't want any type of color showing through the windows of the houses. So I'm going to fill these up, and this is going to give the stocking holders some weight so that when you hang a stocking on there, hopefully they will stay up on the mantle and not fall down. And I found that as I put these in, if I kept shaking it and shaking them down, I could get a lot more in. So the more you can get in, the more weight this will have. Then I just used a little wooden box to set mine in while I was working on it so that the marbles wouldn't all roll out. I'm going to take a piece of cardboard and cut it just big enough to glue over the hole to help hold those in. And so I'm going to use a little bit of E6000 and hot glue just to glue this in place. And I apologize, I think my tripod got bumped and I didn't realize that my picture wasn't in the center of the frame, so I'm really sorry about that. Then I'm going to glue the house to the center of the wooden base, and I've just marked where the center is on that base. And you want to make sure that the front of your house is facing that flat edge that we cut off, because that's where the hook is going to go. And some of the houses may overlap the edge of the base a little bit, and that's totally fine. It's not really going to make a difference. The last step is to add the hooks to the bases, and so I'm just using these hooks. Like I said, I picked them up at Walmart for $7 for this package, and there's 6 hooks in here, and these are perfect for this project. And so I am going to drill some holes, pre-drill this before I screw the hooks on, just because I don't want to split the wood. So I would recommend doing that. And I had my Dremel tool close, so I decided I was going to try and drill the holes using that. It totally did not work well on this wood for that, and so I ended up having to get the drill, the regular drill, to pre-drill my holes. And in the meantime, my camera turned off, and so I didn't get that footage recorded, but I'm just pre-drilling holes and then screwing these hooks into the bases. So here are my finished stocking holders, and they turned out great. And here's a little bit of an update. I used a little bit of sticky tack on the bottom of these, that stuff that you use to hang posters on walls. And between the glass beads that I weighted these with and that little bit of sticky tack, it worked great and held lots of weight in those stockings. So I was very pleased with that, and I'm so happy with how these came out. I found these tobacco baskets. They're $3 each. They're about 15 inches long and about 8 or 9 inches wide. And $3 is an amazing deal for these. So hopefully you can find these in your Target dollar spot, but if not, I'm going to show you how to make one. So the main item I'm going to be using is this Bandit veneer edging, and I picked this up at Home Depot. It was about $6 for 25 feet, and it is pre-glued iron-on wood veneer edging. And I did have to buy 2 packages to finish this basket, but I do have some left over. You could also use some wood glue. I actually ended up not using this, but if you wanted to make your basket a little bit more sturdy, you might want to use some. Some other things you will need is a heat-resistant board. I'm using a glass cutting board, and then iron, and also I'm going to be using some parchment paper just to protect my iron from getting any of the adhesive on it. So I like this for a couple of reasons. It is easy to work with and it is real wood, so it really looks like just a real basket when you're finished. You can also get this on Amazon. It is a little bit more expensive, but I will put the link in the description box below just so you can see exactly what this product is. And if you can't get it in a local store, you can get it on Amazon. The fact that you can just cut this with a regular pair of scissors makes this project so much easier too. So since this veneer has the iron-on adhesive on one side, I'm cutting twice as many pieces. I'm going to double them up, and I'm going to take two pieces and put them with the adhesive sides together so that once I iron them together, I will have a nice wood finish on both sides. And when I iron them, I have the iron on the cotton setting, and the directions are on the package, but it's a nice hot iron, and I am just using that parchment paper to keep the adhesive from getting on my iron. And you could also use like aluminum foil or something like that. And I will give you the quantity and dimensions of my pieces here in a minute, but after you heat up that adhesive, and it doesn't take very long, and those are adhered together, I actually bent the wood up on the edges and held it until the glue started to set or it started to cool down so that I have a nice curved piece. And this is important because it will help you assemble the basket without breaking your wood pieces. And I am going to use this technique on all of the pieces that I cut and glue together. So altogether I cut 10 pieces that were 11 inches long, 6 pieces that were 17 inches long, and 4 pieces that were 18 inches long. So once I have all of my pieces cut and ironed together, I have 5 that are 11 inches long, 3 that are 17 inches long, and 2 that are 18 inches long. Now I'm going to take my 5 11-inch pieces and line them up vertically. Then I will take my 3 17-inch pieces and lay them across horizontally, and I'm going to alternate over, under, and then on the next one that's in the center, it will be the opposite, so like under, over, just so that they are all alternating and you get a nice weave. And as you can see, they kind of want to all go wonky while you're doing this, but once you get them spaced and woven together, then you can adjust them and get it all looking nice. So now that I have it all woven together, I'm going to take some large paper clips. You can use any kind of clips or clamps that you have. The little clips from Dollar Tree would work for these, but I have these big paper clips, so I'm going to put a paper clip on each place where the wood pieces cross, and that way it's going to help hold it all together while I put the rim around the basket. Now I'm going to add in the 2 18-inch diagonal pieces, and they are going to just slip underneath that center intersection. So where that middle paper clip is, I'm just going to remove it and slide this underneath in one direction, and then I will take the other one and slide it underneath in the other direction. I did decide to use some of those bigger Dollar Tree clips from Crafter's Square on the 4 corners of this just to help hold it together. Did I just say corners? You know what I mean, corners. Now I had originally thought that I was going to put some wood glue everywhere, just a little dab everywhere where the wood meets, and so it would hold it together. But once I had it woven together, it really was holding pretty well, and so I decided not to use the wood glue and to just put on my rim and see how well that held the whole thing together. So for my rim of my basket, I cut a 49-inch piece of the veneer edging, and I'm actually using two pieces, so this is where I had to open the second package because I didn't have enough to do the second piece for the rim. So two pieces at 49 inches is what I ended up using for this. So this is the trickiest part of the whole basket, was putting this rim on. And so what I did was just picked a starting point, and I figured it would be easier to start in this kind of on the edge of the long side instead of on a corner. And I'm going to go all the way around the outside of the basket, and I will clip that edging to each piece of the basket, and then I'm going to go all the way around the inside of the basket and clipping it together. So basically all of the pieces that you see here are going to be sandwiched in between these two really long pieces of edging that's going to make the rim. And I hope that kind of makes sense as you watch me do this. And one tip for this, if the pieces of your woven part of the basket are not curved up enough, you can heat them up again either with the iron or a blow dryer, and then bend them up a little bit more so they kind of fit in between these two rim pieces a little bit better. And I just kept going around the basket and adjusting it, getting it to line up the best that I could. The corners are the most challenging, but it just requires a little bit of patience, and you keep working with it. Now I'm going to add the inside piece of that rim, and I should have said this before, but make sure that the adhesive sides are facing each other so that this can be ironed together and sandwich in all of those pieces that we wove together. And now that I have both pieces, the inside and the outside of that rim, sandwiching all of those other pieces in between, I am going to take my iron and I am going to go around and heat that up. I'm doing it first on the inside, and then I'm actually kind of doing this a section at a time, doing it on the inside and then heating it a little bit on the outside, and then I'm going to clip them together so that they are pinched tight and will stick together until the glue cools and hardens. It is a little tricky to do the corners with the iron, but I was able to manage it, and I'm wondering if a blow dryer would work. I'm not sure if it would get hot enough, and I was afraid to use my heat gun because it gets so hot it would actually burn the wood. However, I think you could use the blow dryer just to heat up those corners a little bit, make them a little bit more pliable and easier to work with. Once I was done going around the rim, I did go back one more time and look for some areas that weren't quite stuck together. I had a couple places, and I just gave them a little bit more heat and clamped them together until they were sealed and attached really well. And that's basically how I made my own tobacco basket. Now, I did crack the corners a little bit because I didn't heat it up. I should have used a blow dryer or something to heat that up to make it more pliable, but it's not perfect, but I've seen the ones in the store are not perfect either. And I did have a little bit of that edging left, so if I want to make another one, I think I would only have to buy one more package. So I could make 2 baskets out of 3 packages. And as you can see, here is my basket compared to the one from Target. Mine ended up being a little bit bigger, and really it's pretty sturdy, and I am really happy with it. And I can stain this because it's real wood, or just leave it natural and use it to decorate. I will be using this wire pumpkin wreath form from Dollar Tree to recreate a fall wall decor piece that I saw on the Kirkland's website for $35. I'm going to be decorating this in more muted farmhouse colors, but you could totally do this in the bright fall colors if you'd like. I'm going to be using 2 of these lamb's ear stems that I picked up at Walmart. These were $2 a piece. I'm also going to be using some of these white berries that I got from Dollar Tree, as well as a couple of these little white pumpkins. These are the ones from Dollar Tree that come in a 3-pack and they have the little clips on the bottom. I'm also going to add in a couple of pine cones. These are just some that I had left over from Christmas crafts last year, so I'm just going to pull out a few of these. And I'm going to be using this wide buffalo check wired ribbon. I picked up this roll at Hobby Lobby. I got it 40% off, which made it $6 for 75 feet of ribbon. And this is really nice wired ribbon. You can get the buffalo check ribbon sometimes at Dollar Tree, but I find it's kind of hit or miss. And since I'll probably be using a lot of this, I purchased this 75-foot roll at Hobby Lobby. I'm going to start off by making the bow for the bottom of my pumpkin, and so I'm going to kind of figure out what size I want to make that, and then I am going to be making 3 loops. I'm just going to loop this back and forth until I have 3 loops on each side, and then I'm going to add another loop in the center. So this is going to give me a total of 7 loops for my bow. Then I'm going to take a piece of wire. It can be floral wire, a little bread twisty tie, a chenille stem or pipe cleaner, and just put that through the center of the bow and twist it tightly on the back to secure your bow. And you can also use this to secure your bow to the wire frame. Then I trimmed the ends of my ribbon, and I am actually going to use a black zip tie from Dollar Tree to attach my bow to the frame, just because I think this will secure it really well. Now that I have my bow attached to the frame, I'm going to start adding my florals, and I'm going to add some lamb's ear on each side, kind of behind the bow. And then I will secure that into place using some hot glue. Then I'm going to add in some of my white berries, and I have 2 different kinds. I have some that are a little bit larger and then some that are smaller, almost like a baby's breath. And I liked using the 2 different kinds because I wanted them still to be white, but I liked the variation that the 2 different berries adds. Next, I'm going to add in my pumpkins, and to do this I am going to take a piece of floral wire, and it's probably about 6 inches long. I'm going to fold it in half, and then I'm going to insert it into the bottom of the pumpkins. Now these are just like styrofoam pumpkins, so they poke down in there really easily. I'm going to add a little hot glue to the hole that I just made, and then stick that wire down in there and let it set up. Once the glue has hardened, I'm going to give that wire a twist about an inch down from the bottom of the pumpkin, and then I'm going to attach it to the wire frame. And the reason I'm doing this is because this will cause it to actually stick up more and not get buried in the florals or the ribbon, because if you had to glue it directly to the frame, it would be really far down and it wouldn't stick up, and I want it to be a little more prominent. And I'm doing the same thing with the other pumpkin, and then I'm also going to do the same thing with the pine cones. I did decide to add a little bit more lamb's ear into this before I added the pine cones, and then like I said, I'm going to put wires on the pine cones, just hot glue them on, and that way I can make them so they stick out a little bit more. And I know it seems a little weird to put the pine cones in a fall wreath because normally we think of them for Christmas, but I really like the looks of them in this. I think why not? I mean, pine cones are on the ground all the time, and so I think it just adds a nice different texture and variety to this. If you are new to my channel, thank you so much for watching, and if you like DIY projects, be sure to hit that subscribe button and stick around because I do a lot of that here on this channel. So now I am just filling in some places with some more of the berries, and anywhere there's a little bit of a hole or a gap, I'm just adding a little bit more of the lamb's ear or some berries. So now that I have the bottom the way that I like it, I'm going to add a little bit to the top, and I'm basically going to be doing the same thing. I'm going to make a bow and add some greenery and just make it a little bit smaller than what is on the bottom. So here I'm making my bow, and instead of 3 loops on each side, I only did 2 plus the center loop, so this bow is just 5 loops total. And instead of centering the bow, I am going to put it off center just a little bit to the right because I don't want to cover up the stem all the way. Then I'm going to add the lamb's ear. I'm also going to add this pine cone. Now this one was a little bit bigger and it didn't have the white on it. But I kind of disguised it, made it look a little bit smaller by hiding part of it behind the bow. Then I will go ahead and add some berries to this as well. Now the pine cones that I used on the bottom had a little bit of white on them, and since the one on the top that I used did not, I just added a little bit of white or ivory colored chalk paint to that pine cone. So here it is all finished. I spent less than $10 to recreate this wall decor piece that I saw on Kirkland's website for $35. So I'm really pleased with it. I love the color scheme. It's very farmhouse, and it's something that would be really easy to change up if you prefer the more traditional fall colors. To make my lantern, I will be using 2 of these floating shelves from Dollar Tree. And I will be using 12 of these 12-inch dowels, also from Dollar Tree, and there are 10 in a package, so you do have to buy 2 packages. I will also be using just the lid from this cardboard gift box and this small wooden wall art or decor piece. I'm going to be using a small piece of this microfiber towel from the car care aisle in Dollar Tree, and this little white church Christmas ornament, as well as one of these miniature trees, and also I am going to use some of the miniatures. I chose this park bench and the 2 lamp posts. The only thing I'm using that did not come from Dollar Tree is one of these wooden balls. These are 1.5 inches in diameter. I picked these up at Hobby Lobby, and I'm using the ones that have one side that is flat. For the light in my lantern, I will be using this small little Tupperware container from Dollar Tree. These come in a pack of, I believe, 8 for $1, and they are in the container section. And then of course I'm going to be using an LED tea light. First I'm going to take 12 of the 12-inch dowels, and I will be gluing them together in groups of 3. So I'm going to take 2 of the dowels and use some wood glue and a little bit of hot glue just to secure them and glue those together. And then in the little channel that is between them, I'm going to glue the 3rd dowel, and just adding a little more wood glue and some hot glue, and then I'm going to secure them using some rubber bands to hold them together until the glue is all dry. And I am wiping any excess glue away so you don't have any big globs or anything. So once they're glued together, you want them to look like this, so they're in a triangle. Next, I'm going to take the two floating shelves and I'm turning them upside down, and I'm going to be gluing them together. However, there are two little places where the plastic sticks out a little bit, and so I need to trim those off. I'm going to use some wire cutters just to snip that off. I would recommend wearing some eye protection for this. And so I snip them off closely, and then I'm going to use some sandpaper and just get that all nice and flush so that the two pieces fit together nicely. Then I'm going to take some E6000 and just glue these two pieces together. I'm going to use some clamps to hold mine together while the glue dries. I think they would dry okay without the clamps, but I'm just using these to make sure. While the glue is drying, I'm going to take my miter box and saw, and I'm going to cut the chicken off the top of that little decor piece. And then I'm going to sand off the rough area. And I'm going to remove the labels. I'm using a heat gun. This is the best hack ever. Just use a heat gun and that sticker will lift right up. And then if there is any sticky residue left, just take your sticker and on that warm surface just blot it, and it will pull all of the sticky residue off. So I chose this box lid because, as you can see, it's pretty much the same size as the inside of those floating shelves. And I'm going to paint all of these pieces with the black chalk paint. You can use just an acrylic paint or craft paint for this as well. And now that my glue is dry, I'm going to measure the inside of the shelves or the base of my lantern, and I am going to cut out a piece of the white microfiber cloth that is that size. And I did trim off the edges just because I didn't want that stitching to show. I wanted it to all be nice and fluffy because this is going to be the snow in the bottom of my lantern. So I'm going to lay the fabric in there and make sure that it fits well. And I am going to need to glue my sides of my lantern into the corners of this base. So I am going to just cut off the corners of the fabric so that I can glue those in and it won't be all bunched up. And to glue these in, I am just putting some E6000 on the end of each dowel, and then I'm going to add a little hot glue in the center and just glue it into each corner. And the hot glue is going to hold it while the E6000 dries. Next, I'm going to glue the wooden ball to the center of the smaller wood piece. And then I'm going to glue that piece to the center of the gift box lid. And so I'm just measuring to make sure that it is equal on all of the sides. And again, I'll use the E6000 and a little bit of hot glue to attach this. I would recommend trying to find a sturdier wall decor piece to use instead of the gift box lid, but I couldn't find anything in my store that was the right size, so I went with this, and it did work out okay. And after the glue was dry, I did take a clear matte sealer and spray this just to make sure the paint stays on and it lasts well. I'm going to glue down my microfiber cloth just with hot glue. Then I'm going to take the church ornament and cut off the hanger and also remove the little bit of greenery that is on this because I want it to look a little bit more realistic. And I'm going to arrange all my pieces and get them where I want them before I glue anything down. So I decided to use the smaller of the two trees. I thought it looked better in this little scene. And then I decided to take some white paint and add a little bit to the bench so that it looked like it had a little bit of snow that had fallen on it, and then I also added it to both of the lamp posts. And then I'm going to secure all of the pieces down with hot glue. Next, I'm going to glue my light to the bottom of my lid, and the tea light will go upside down in the little Tupperware container, and then that is going to get glued to the underside of the lid. And so I'm gluing that lid of the little container to the center of the bottom side of my lantern lid, and that way it's really easy to just set the tea light on top of that and pop the top of, or actually the bottom of the container on. I decided I needed some pieces to help hold the top of the lantern in place, so I'm cutting 4 little pieces of dowel just 1 inch long, and I'm going to glue them diagonal in each corner, and this will give a little place for each of those dowel sides of the lantern to fit into. And then once the glue is dry, I paint those black as well, and they just pretty much disappear. You don't really even notice that they're there. Then I'm going to take some greenery and florals from Dollar Tree. I just took this one pick and kind of tore it all apart, and I'm going to use the pieces to add some florals to this. And I also ended up using that little piece that I took off of the church ornament. Now you might notice here that the lantern is pretty tall, and I decided that it was too tall, and this was with the 12-inch dowels. I did end up cutting the dowels down to 10 inches, and I would recommend maybe going with 10 inches. Here it is finished with 10 inches high, and I like it a lot better. But I love how this turned out. I was so excited that it all came together, and I think it looks so high end. For this next project, I will be using this tinsel tree from Dollar Tree, and I'm actually making a set of 2, so I picked up 2 of these, and I'm going to use some nautical rope, and then I'll be using more of that eucalyptus sprig that I got from Walmart, and I'll be using 2 of these red berry garlands from Dollar Tree. I'm going to start by removing the tinsel from the tree, and this is really easy. It's just looped around a little hook on the bottom, so you just find that end and then basically just unwind it. And I'm not going to throw the tinsel away. I'm going to save that and use it for something else. Next, I'm going to put a little bit of hot glue into the end of my rope and just twist that and hold it tight. This will keep it from coming apart and fraying. So now I'm going to glue the end of my rope to the top of the tree, and I'm going to do it a little bit at an angle. And then I'm going to wind my rope around the tree, and I'm going to leave about 2 inches or so in between each row of rope. There are little plastic knobs on this little cage or frame, and I thought about cutting them off, but I'm so glad that I didn't. You want to leave them on because they really help hold everything in place as you're winding it around. And when we're all done, you won't even ever see them. So then I secured the end of the rope at the bottom, and then I'm going to start pulling off some more of these sprigs of eucalyptus, and I am going to glue these in between the rope all the way around the tree. So once all the greenery is on, this is what it should look like. And now I'm going to add that berry garland, and I'm going to start at the bottom of the tree, and I'm going to go along the bottom of the eucalyptus that we just added, and I'm going to wind all the way up the tree, and then I'm going to attach it at the top of the tree with a little bit of hot glue to hold it in place, and then I'm going to wind all the way back down the tree, this time on the top side of the eucalyptus. And then I'll just secure that with a little bit of hot glue at the base, and all the berries are on. So now I'm going to take the ivory chalk paint, and I am going to very lightly brush all over this to give it like a little bit of a frosty look. And you'll see in a little bit that I actually ended up adding little pine cones to this later, and then I had to paint those again. So if you're going to add little pine cones, do it before you paint the white paint on, and it'll save you a step. These are little miniature pine cones that I picked up at Michael's. You can find them at Dollar Tree sometimes, but any of the craft stores or maybe even Walmart would have them. And like I said before, since I added the pine cones on after I'd already put the white paint on, then I had to go back and add a little bit of white paint to each of the pine cones. But I'm really glad I went back and added the pine cones. It was just the finishing touch that this little tree needed. So first I'm just taking some sandpaper and going over the iron legs just to rough it up a little bit to prep it for some spray paint. So I'm just going to freshen up the iron legs with some black spray paint. This is some I picked up off of Amazon, but you can pick it up at craft stores or at Walmart, at least if you're able to get to those stores. But if not, you can get it on Amazon. So I just painted the legs, and then I also painted that underside of the tabletop just so it had a nice fresh coat of paint. Once that was dry, I took the sandpaper and just went around the edge of the tabletop and also across the top of the table and got rid of any raised areas or spots that needed smoothed out. Since my new craft desk has now become my home office for the next however long, I will be working on this project in my dining room. So originally I had wanted to go to some thrift stores and pick up some miscellaneous dishes that I could break up and use for this project. However, since I am not getting out of the house, Amazon to the rescue again. I got these Mexican tiles, and they are advertised as broken tile, and they came, most of them broken, but some of them were full tiles except for just maybe a tiny chip. And I am using these for this project, and so I just took them all out of the box and kind of sorted them and organized them by colors. I really don't have a plan for how I'm going to do this mosaic. I just am kind of going to plan it as I go and see what tiles I like and what I want to use. So there seem to be quite a few that have the navy blue and also the green in them, and I like those colors, so I'll probably be using those predominantly in this project. And I'm thinking of using one of these full tiles as the center of my tabletop. I wasn't too sure how I was going to break these up, so I thought I would experiment a little bit. I'm putting a tile inside a gallon Ziploc bag, and then I have a cutting board, and I'm just going to try and tap it with the hammer and see if I can break it into smaller pieces. And I actually tried to tap pretty hard on this cutting board and it did not break. So I found that I had to take it out to the garage and lay it on the cement, and then I tapped it with the edge of the hammer and it broke really easily that way. Then once I had my tiles broken into pieces about the size that I wanted, I just started to lay them out on my tabletop, and I'm starting with the outside edge first and just laying them around and placing them dry before I put any glue on them. I want to lay it out so that I have it set like it's going to be before I start gluing anything down. I played around with several different things for the center of my table, and ultimately I decided to go ahead and use a full tile that barely had a teeny tiny chip out of the edge of it as the focal point for my table, and then I'm just building around that, filling in with the different tiles. And I did kind of a white background tile right around that center tile, and then I did kind of green tiles around the outside edge, and then all of the rest had more of the blue background in it. And so it's really not a definite pattern, but I did try to do somewhat of a little bit of a pattern. So before I glue anything down, I'm just measuring to make sure that center tile is in the center, and I traced around it with a pencil, and then I'm using this Weld Bond glue. This was recommended for tile, and you put a thin layer on the surface and then a thin layer on the tile and press that down. And this worked really well. It started to set up pretty quickly. Within 5 minutes you could tell it was really sticking, and within an hour it's dry and then completely set in 24 hours. So one thing I found out the hard way was that I needed to make sure that all of my tiles were the same thickness because I'm just using a thin glue underneath them, and so they needed to be the same thickness if I wanted my tabletop to be level. If you are using tile that is uneven, then you would want to use like a mastic underneath so it's thicker and you can push down at different levels your tiles to make your tabletop level. And so I had to really pick and choose my tiles to make sure that I had a level tabletop. Since the gaps between my tiles are larger than 1/8 of an inch, I needed to use a sanded grout, and this is important so that it has stability and it won't crack. And I'm also going to be using a cake decorating bag and then a little putty knife, and I have a couple containers, one to mix my grout in, and then the other I have a bucket and some sponges to put some water in. So I wasn't sure really how much of this grout to mix up, so I actually ended up mixing up about twice as much as I needed, but I just put a little bit of water in my container and then added the sanded grout powder, and I'm using this in the color of antique white. We just picked this up at Ace Hardware, and so I'm sure you can get it at Home Depot, Lowe's, you can probably order it online, but we got it at Ace Hardware. And I will put a list of all of the supplies that I used in the description box with links to where you can get them. The instructions on the bag just said to mix this to desired consistency, but I wasn't really sure what that was, and I think I mixed mine a little bit thick, but it still ended up working great. And so I kind of went with the idea that since I was using a piping bag to put this in between the tiles, that I made it the consistency of frosting. So that's kind of what I went by. You're supposed to let it sit for like 10 minutes and then stir it again, and it did thicken up quite a bit during that time. But anyway, it was pretty easy to work with. The reason I'm using a piping bag is because we thought we had one of those floating tile trowel to float the grout on, and we could not find it anywhere. We looked everywhere, and since we're not supposed to be going out of the house, I just decided to look up alternatives, and I saw that you could use what they call a grout bag, which is basically the same thing as one of these piping bags for cake decorating. And I had some of those, so I just used a disposable cake decorating bag, and I'll show you here in a minute how that worked out. So here you can see that the grout mixture thickened up quite a bit, but as I worked with it, it seemed to soften back up. So here is my piping bag. I'm going to put it in a glass and fill it up. That makes it really easy. And then I'm going to snip off the end of the bag so that I can pipe that out. And I am just squeezing it out in between all of the tiles, filling in all of the spaces really well, and then I'm using the putty knife to just spread it around a little bit. And I thought this worked really well. I think it would be faster to use the trowel. However, I think this is a less messy way to do it. Although I wouldn't recommend doing this technique on a large piece that you're doing mosaic on, because your hand will probably get really tired. So I'm doing a small section at a time, filling in the grout and then going over it with the putty knife, and also using my finger a little bit. But then I'm taking a wet sponge and just wiping off all of the excess grout until it's only between the tiles and the tiles are clean. And I did read that if you choose a grout color that is contrasting to your tile colors, then that will really help your tile colors to pop and make your designs stand out more. So as you can see, I did have about twice as much grout as I needed, but live and learn. I had a big bag and I still have a lot left for future projects. So one of my biggest challenges with this project was knowing what to do with the edge of the table. I wasn't sure exactly how to put tile on the edge, so I decided to just paint the edge, and I'm using ivory colored chalk paint by Waverly to paint the edge. And then I decided to, when I put the tiles on the top of the table, I actually left about 1/4 of an inch around the edge of the table. And I am going to be using some nautical rope from Dollar Tree, and I am going to just put this around the edge of the table up against the tiles just to finish it off. And I really like this kind of mixed media thing. It just adds a different texture and it finishes it off. And I'm going to be keeping this table inside, so this will work really well. And the nautical rope was perfect for this. So I am not gonna lie, this project was pretty time consuming, which is one reason I have not actually done a mosaic project in the past. But I figured now was a perfect time to tackle this, and I really enjoyed it. I just put some music on and just had a fun time working on this project, and I love how it turned out. And I do want to add that you will want to seal the grout with a grout sealer once it has dried completely. So, after several days, you will want to get some sealer to protect the table and help keep that grout from cracking or staining. In this next project, I will be recreating this two-tiered country farmhouse tray. I will be using one of these planter trolleys from Dollar Tree, and this has some little wheels on the bottom of it so that it rolls around. And for the top tray, I am going to be using this pie pan from Dollar Tree. I will also be using a 12-inch long piece of wooden dowel. This is a 7/8 inch dowel, and I got it at Walmart. It was longer. This is just a piece I had left over, but you could also use even the handle of one of the plungers from Dollar Tree. And then I'm going to be using one of these chopping mats out of this 2-pack from Dollar Tree. I'm going to be using just one of these shower rings out of this pack from Dollar Tree. And I will be using one wooden bead, and this is just something I had in my stash, and I'd say it's about 1 inch in diameter. To paint my trays, I'm going to be using some of this aluminum metallic spray paint that I picked up at Walmart. And I'll be using some elephant colored chalk paint by Waverly and just some lighter gray craft paint, and it's not shown here, but I'm also going to be using some black craft paint. And for glue, I'll be using E6000 as well as my hot glue gun. I'm going to cut a circle out of one of the chopping mats to fit in the bottom of this planter trolley, and it just so happens that that pie pan is the exact size of the inside of that planter trolley, so I'm using that as a template. I'm just going to trace around it with a Sharpie marker and cut that out with scissors. And the reason I'm doing this is because that planter trolley has those indented places in it, and things won't sit level in that tray if I don't put something over the top of those. Next, I'm going to take my dowel and I'm going to measure up 8 inches and make a mark because I want to cut an 8-inch piece and have a 4-inch piece left. Then, using my miter box and my saw, I'm going to cut that dowel at the place where I marked it, and I will put a link in the description box to this miter box set. It is so handy for doing small crafts like this, and I use it a lot. Then I'm going to take some sandpaper and just smooth out any rough edges and make sure there's no little splinters. Now I'm going to assemble what will be the top of my post for this, or my handle, so to speak, and this shower curtain ring fits right into the holes in this wooden bead, except the one end sticks out at an angle a little bit, so I'm just taking a drill and drill bit and just very carefully making the hole a little bit bigger, just so the end of that shower curtain ring will lay a little flatter up against the bead, and it's not perfect, but it works a little bit better this way. Then I'm going to take that and put a little bit of hot glue inside the hole on that bead and insert my ring. And you want to work a little bit quickly here so that you get the bead positioned correctly with how the ring sits inside that hole. Then I'm going to take a little bit of E6000 and put on top of the 4-inch dowel and set the bead on top of that, and then I will take my hot glue gun and run some hot glue really carefully and neatly all the way around the base of that bead to help it stay in place while that E6000 is drying. Next, I'm going to take that planter trolley and I'm covering up those wheels with some painter's tape just so that when I spray paint it, the paint doesn't cause the wheels to get stuck. Then I'm going to take my metallic aluminum spray paint and I'm going to spray the entire bottom and all this around the sides of that planter trolley. Next, I'm going to insert that piece that I cut out from the chopping mat, and I'm marking right where the center is because I want to know where that center post is going to be so that I can cut that out, and actually I'll be gluing my post to the tray itself, or to the center of the trolley. But I'm using some E6000 and some hot glue to glue in that bottom insert, and then I will spray paint the entire inside. And you can see here that I'm holding that post in the center because I want to still be able to see where I marked when I go to cut it out. And then I just make sure it has a good coat of spray paint. Once my spray paint has dried, I am going to use the elephant chalk paint and also the lighter colored gray craft paint, and I'm going to use kind of a fluffy old paintbrush that I have, and I'm going to just pounce these colors all over the two trays. And I'm going to start with the darker color, then I'll go over the top with some of the lighter color, and then back and forth a couple of times, alternating, just kind of filling in and giving it really kind of a mottled look, kind of like galvanized metal is. So you can see here that I'm getting a little bit of the paint off of the brush before I actually put it onto the trays. I want it to be kind of a really random pattern, so I am twisting and turning my brush as I pounce it on there and just giving it a really random look. And don't worry, because at first it doesn't look like it's going to look like galvanized metal at all. It just looks really kind of messy, but once you start layering the different colors, then it really starts building up that galvanized metal look and gives it some more dimension. So after I put on the layer of dark, then I'm going to take the light color paint and do the exact same thing over the whole project. A couple of things to note here. I didn't worry about doing the very bottom of that bottom tray, and also on that center place in the middle of the inside of the tray where we marked where the post is going to go. I didn't paint over that because I still needed to see that mark where I need to cut out that hole. On the pie pan, I am measuring to find the center of the inside of the pan. I'm going to mark that because I don't want to paint right in the center so that my post will adhere better when I glue it to the center of this pie pan. Then I'm going to use the same painting technique that I used on the planter trolley that will be the bottom tray, and I'm going to paint both the inside and the outside of this pie pan. Next, I'm going to use some Waverly chalk paint in the color ink. You can use any black craft paint for this, and I'm going to paint my dowels and the little ring on the top of the other dowel. And I didn't get it all in the video, but I'm just painting all of it black except for the ends where I'm going to be gluing it. Now I'm going to take an X-Acto knife and very carefully cut out that circle where I traced around the dowel on that plastic cutting mat. Now remember, this is a chopping mat, and so it is a little bit hard to cut through, which is a good thing if you're using it for a chopping mat. But I had to go around this probably 5 or 6 times, pushing quite a bit with a lot of pressure to cut out this circle, but just want to do this slowly and carefully so you don't cut yourself. I did also spray my pieces with this clear matte sealer, and when I sprayed the dowels I did not spray the ends so that they were free of that when I glued them to the trays. Which is the next and final step. So I'm going to put a little bit of E6000 in the center, and then I'm adding some hot glue so that that will cause the dowel to stand up and hold it while the E6000 dries for a stronger bond. And you do have to hold these for a little bit. And then I'll also be doing the same thing on the top tray. I will put that shorter dowel with the little ring on that in the center of that pie pan, and also with E6000 and a little bit of hot glue. And then I'm going to place some E6000 and again some more hot glue on the top of the dowel that is in the planter trolley, and place my pie pan on this. And when you do this, you want to make sure it's centered and kind of look at it from the side to make sure those dowels are lined up so that it looks like it's going all the way through. So here's the finished tray. I love how it looks. It is not as sturdy as probably the $50 one would be. But in my original video, several of you commented that I should use a screw up through the bottom of the tray into the dowel, and I agree. I think that that would stabilize it a lot better. To make this lantern, I will be using this Bandit wood veneer edging that I picked up at Lowe's. This is 3/4 inch wide. It is pre-glued iron-on, and it comes in a 25-foot roll. I will be using about 13 feet for this lantern. You can also pick up wood veneer edging in a 50-foot roll from Amazon, and I will put that link in the description box below. I will also be using one of these burner covers from Dollar Tree. I will be using the smaller one that comes in this package of 2. For the top of my lantern, I picked up a package of these little wood finials from Hobby Lobby. I used a 40% off coupon, so they were about $1.60 or so for this 3-pack. I'll also be using a scrap piece of foam board and some black spray paint. And for my adhesives, I will be using some E6000 as well as some Gorilla Hot Glue. And because I will be ironing, I have a cloth to protect my work surface. You could use an ironing board if you have one handy, and then I have my iron and use it set on the cotton setting for this. To start out with, I'm going to make a circle out of the wood edging. I need it to be the same size as the burner cover, so I'm just using that as a guide, and I'm going to cut 2 pieces that are about 1/2 inch longer than what I need to go all the way around. That way I have a little bit to overlap and glue together. Then I'm going to place the two adhesive sides together so that I have the nice wood finished edge on the outsides, and then I will just iron those together. It doesn't take a very long time just to heat up that glue and stick them together. And while it's still warm, I'm going to wrap it around the burner cover and hold it for a little bit. This will help it to hold its shape as it cools. Then I'm going to take a little bit of E6000 and a little hot glue and glue the ends together. Next I'm going to cut the pieces for the sides of the lantern. There are 4 sides and they are 14 inches long. I need 2 pieces for each side, so I need a total of 8 pieces that are 14 inches long. After I have those cut, I'm going to take 2 pieces and put the adhesive sides together again and iron those together. I'm going to trim up my ends a little bit. Once you iron the pieces together, you get a little bit of uneven ends, so I'm just kind of squaring those off a little bit. Next I'm going to measure up 8 inches on each piece of wood and put a mark so that I know where that 8-inch line is. The reason I'm doing this is because I need my piece to be straight for 8 inches before it starts to curve. So I'm going to iron above that 8-inch mark and heat that up so that I can bend it. And I'm setting my ring on this so I can kind of get an idea of how far I need to bend it in for it to reach the center. And then I'm going to hold it in place until it cools so that it will stay in that position. And then I'm going to use that piece as a guide to shape my other 3 pieces. Then I'm going to glue these pieces to the edge of my burner cover using hot glue and E6000, and the E6000 is going to make sure that it adheres to that metal really well. The hot glue will just help hold it in place until the E6000 sets. And because the edge of the burner cover tapers in a little bit, I did heat up the very bottom of the wood piece and bend it just a little bit so that it was nice and straight once I glued it to the side of the burner cover. I'm just gluing these straight across from each other, and then I'll put the other 2 on the opposite sides, sort of like north, south, east, and west. Next I'm going to insert my ring and glue it down, and I am going to use those marks that I made at 8 inches, and the top of the ring I'm going to line that up with that mark and glue it again using E6000 and hot glue, and I'll do that on all 4 of the sides. Next I'll take that scrap piece of foam board, and I'm just using a small jar to make a circle the size that I want. I'm going to use my new hobby kit from Arteza that they sent me and cut out this foam board, and this is going to be the top piece of my lantern. I will put the link in the description box below for this hobby knife set if you are interested in that. It's a really nice set. Before I glue the top on, I need to flatten out the top of the sides a little bit, and so I'm just warming those up with the iron and folding them over just a little bit to flatten them out so the top will sit more level. And then I'm just hot gluing this on. I didn't even use E6000 on this, and so it's just hot glued. And you do want to pay attention to kind of how the tops of your sides are curving in to kind of get them symmetrical. Then I'm going to use my miter box and saw, and I'm going to just cut off that little end piece on the finial so that it will sit nice and flat on the top of my lantern. Then I'm going to smooth that cut edge on some sandpaper real quick and make it nice and flat and smooth. And then I'm going to glue it to the center of the top of the lantern with some E6000 and hot glue. Next, I'm going to give the whole thing a good coat of spray paint. Actually, I did 2 lighter coats, and then I also turned the lantern upside down and made sure to spray inside the top of the lantern to make sure it was all covered. Once the black paint is dry, I'm going to take some ivory colored chalk paint and a dry brush, and I'm going to dry brush over the whole piece. And dry brushing just means you get a very little bit of paint on a dry brush and lightly go over to leave just a little bit of residue to give it kind of an aged look. Here is my finished lantern. I think it looks great, and instead of $37, I spent $8.50. I did have the paint on hand, so I'm not counting that in the cost, but for $8.50, I am really pleased with how this came out. In my original video for this project, I did show how to make this other white lantern as well. I will put the link in the description box below. This was a part of the Look for Less challenge that Yami from the Latina Next Door puts on, and so I'll put the link to her channel as well so you can check out all of those Look for Less challenge videos, because a lot of the projects that I do are a part of that challenge. For this project, I am using 6 of these solid wood signs from Dollar Tree. And I'm going to be using 4 of these wood signs, also from Dollar Tree, that I had in my stash that I picked up a while back. And I'm going to be using 3 of these picture frames from Dollar Tree. These say they're for a 3.5 by 5 inch picture. That would be if you're using the matte. They're actually like a 5 by 7 picture frame. I will be using 1 package of the decorative nautical rope, and I'm going to be using 3 packages of these pop-up stickers. To start off, I'm going to be removing the back and the glass and everything from the picture frame, and I'll just set that aside because I will be using it later. Then I'm going to take the pop-up stickers and I am going to be placing these all around the frames. It is easier if you fold the little tabs down flat so that the frame will lay flat on the table. I'm going to stick these all the way around the frame, and I'm leaving a little bit of space in between them. I would recommend just barely setting these down on the frame and not pushing them down until you have them placed exactly where you want them, just so you can get the spacing right. These actually stuck really well with just the adhesive that was on them, and if you stick them down, it is tough to get them pulled back up. So just put them on lightly, and then you can adjust them before you push them all on and get them secured. And then I'm going to repeat that and put these around all 3 frames. Next, I'm going to take 3 of those larger wooden pieces that I got from Dollar Tree, and I am going to connect them together. You can use wood glue. I could not find mine, so I'm using this Weld Bond glue. And I'm also going to be using my staple gun. I love this. It's great for crafting. I will put the link in the description box below for that. So I am using this carpenter square so I can make sure and get everything straight, and then I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the ends, and then I'm going to use the staple gun to secure them. I probably should have stapled the sides that had the letters and the writing on them, because I ended up having to put probably several more coats of paint on this to cover the words up than I would have had to if I had just put the staples on the other side, but hindsight is 20/20. So then I'm going to flip this over, and the glue's not dry, so I'm going to place some painter's tape over that seam and set a rock on that so that it will weight it down while that glue is drying. Then I'm going to repeat this whole process for the other 3 pieces of wood. And while that glue is drying, I'm going to use some of this heirloom white spray paint, and I'm going to spray paint my frames. Since I stapled my boards wrong, and I am going to have to make the sides with the words the front of my project, I decided to sand off a little bit of the design just to make it so that my spray paint hopefully covers the design better. In the end, it really didn't matter. I had to spray everything with about 4 or 5 coats of the spray paint, so maybe chalk paint would work better and cover this better. But I am spray painting 3 of the 4 smaller boards, and I'm leaving the 4th one. I kept the design on it. That was just something I decided to try to see if I liked it, and then I decided if I didn't like it, then I'd be able to paint over it and make it just like the others. So this is that board that I saved, and I am keeping the saying that was on it, but the paint around the edges and the back of it is a red paint, and so I am going to paint the edges of it black, and I'm using the chalk paint for this, and that covered really well. I only had to do 1 coat, and I'm going to also be painting the edges of the ones that I painted white on the front as well, so that they all match. Next, I'm going to take my black paint and a dry brush and just get a very little bit of paint on my brush, wipe off the excess, and I am going to dry brush on the picture frames just to give them a more distressed look, and so they're not quite as much of a stark white. Then I'm going to add my glass back in the frame, add my picture, and then put the backing of the frame on as well. And I did remove the stand from the back of the frame. It just pulls off with not much effort at all. So now that all of my pieces are painted and dry and ready to go, I am going to assemble this. And basically, you want to take your time, measure everything, and make sure that you have everything in the right place before you start gluing and attaching everything. So another way you could do this project is to go to like Home Depot or Lowe's and have them cut your pieces to the lengths that you need. Just for reference, my longer pieces are 54 inches long, and the shorter like ladder rungs are 16 inches long, and you could just have them cut like 1x2s. This would probably be about the same cost. So I just laid everything out, and I'm measuring to make sure that the top and the bottom are the same distance apart, and then I'm spacing the ladder rungs just so that it all looks good. My top and bottom rung were about 3 inches from the ends, and then I had about 13 3/8 inch in between the rungs where the picture frames are. But it will really just depend on the materials you use and the sizes and spacing that you want. So just play around with that to do what looks good to you. And once I had everything laid out, I marked the pieces with pencil so that I could easily see those when I go to glue them down. And I am using a combination of my weld bond glue and the hot glue gun to do this. I glued the top one down, and now I'm gluing the bottom one down. And again, it's really important to make sure that they are the same distance apart for your vertical pieces. And then again, just going in with the wood glue and then the hot glue. The hot glue will help hold it in place while the wood glue dries and gives it a stronger bond. And after I have the end pieces glued, then I'm going to go back and glue down the 2 middle rungs. Now that it's all glued together, I am going to take my black paint and my dry brush and go ahead and dry brush my ladder so that it all matches with those picture frames and that everything looks distressed. And I did go ahead and add a little bit of the black paint dry brushing to that sign on the top as well. Next, I'm going to take my nautical rope from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to tie a knot in one end, and then I'm going to measure down with that knot sitting on the top rung of the ladder. I'm going to measure how long I need it so that I can have it go all the way from the top rung to the bottom rung, and then I'll tie another knot at the bottom. Then I'm going to hold up my picture frame and kind of decide about where I need the ropes to be placed so that I can glue the picture frames to the ropes. And then I make a mark on the top rung, and I will also make a mark on the bottom rung, and I just measure over to make sure they are the same distance. And as you can see, Jake is supervising me very closely on this project. Really, he's just waiting very impatiently for me to give him a treat. So now that I have it marked where my rope is going to go, I am just using my hot glue gun, and I am going to glue the knot to the top of that top rung where I made the mark, and then I'll just hold that in place until the glue has set. Then I'm going to pull the rope tight, and I'm going to hot glue the knot on the bottom to the bottom side of that bottom rung, and that the rope should be pretty tight, and so you'll have to hold that in place until the glue sets. Then just to secure the ropes a little bit more, I am going to use my hot glue gun and glue the ropes to the back side of those rungs. Then for the last step, I'm going to glue my pictures to those ropes. And I am gluing the ropes only to the backing that is on the picture frame. I'm not gluing it to the frames themselves because I want to be able to change the pictures out. So this way I can remove the backing and pull the frame off the front and still change out the pictures if I want to. And so I just eyeballed this. I didn't really measure it. I just kind of put it up there till it looked like it was centered, and then I glued the ropes onto the picture. For this project, I will be using a hula hoop from Dollar Tree, and this is the smaller size. It is about 20 inches in diameter. If you want to make a larger wreath, you can use the bigger hula hoop as well. I will also be using one package of these 5-gallon paint stir sticks. These are from Walmart. I think they're about $1.47. And I'll be using this wall decal from Dollar Tree. I will be using some jute twine. This is some I got at Walmart. It's a large roll for $3.47, I think. You can also get smaller rolls at Dollar Tree. And I think you would probably need at least 2 for this project if you use the small ones from Dollar Tree. I'm going to be using 2 of these large eucalyptus stems from Walmart. These were $3 a piece, but they're a real good size, so I only need 2 of them. And I'm going to use some artificial flowers. These are some that we actually used in my daughter's wedding to decorate the arch. And so they have special meaning, and I have them just laying around, so I'm going to use these, but you could use some from Dollar Tree or Walmart. To start, I am going to take the foil tape off of the outside of the hula hoop, and I'm using an X-Acto knife just to lift up the edge, and then it just peels up. It was a little hard to get started, but after that it just peeled right off. And you probably could leave this tape on, but I decided to take it off since I'm going to be gluing the twine to the hula hoop. I wanted it to glue directly to the plastic hoop. But you could use just the hoop with this nice dark charcoal gray color just the way it is. So I want mine to be a little bit more farmhouse, so I am going to use twine, and I did decide to take the beads out of the hula hoop. It probably wouldn't matter because it's going to be hanging up on the wall and not being moved around, but I just decided it was easy to do, so I just pulled the ends apart and dumped the little beads out and threw them away. I am hot gluing my twine to start off. I'm gluing it right where the hoop goes together at that seam, just because I think that will help hold that together, and then I just added a fairly generous amount of glue at the beginning, and then I am just wrapping the twine, and I did not glue it again until I got to the very end. Wrapping the twine can be a little bit tedious. It does take quite a while to do, but I found that it was easiest if I left the twine on the roll and then just wrapped that around and around the hoop. Like about 5 or 6 times. Then I pulled the twine tight and just continued that process all the way around the hoop. And once I got to the end, then I just trimmed off the twine and hot glued it down. So if you did not want a farmhouse look, you could totally spray paint this hoop in like a metallic if you want it to be more glam, or even just a white or a black if you want it to look a little more modern. There's a lot of options for making this fit your decor. So next I'm going to assemble my paint stir sticks into a sign for my wreath. And I'm going to lay them kind of in the position that I want and mark the end of them to trim them off because they are just a little bit too long. And for this I will be using my miter box and saw. I'll put the link to that in the description box below. This is a great tool to have in your crafting stash for small projects. And now you can see they fit perfectly, and don't worry about those ends of the stir sticks that are smaller because they're going to be covered up with the florals. Next I'm going to use some ivory colored chalk paint by Waverly. I get this at Walmart, and I'm going to paint my stir sticks, and then I'll be using some truffle colored chalk paint just to dry brush to make them look a little bit aged. I'm going to use some craft sticks just to glue across the backs to hold them together. And I'm just trimming them with scissors and then hot gluing them to the back, making sure that my edges are lined up and that the stir sticks are together tightly. So now that I have that together, I'm going to do my dry brushing, and I am just using that truffle brown paint. You can use any color of darker paint. It could be a gray, it could be a brown, or even a black, but you just want to get a very little bit on a dry paintbrush and then wipe the excess off of the brush and then lightly brush across your project just to leave a little bit on the project, and this gives it an aged look. Now I'm going to attach the wall sticker to my sign, and I picked this up at Dollar Tree. They have a lot of different styles. I really liked the looks of this one, and so when I put this on, I am cheating it over to the right hand side a little bit because my greenery is going to go on the left hand side and I don't want it to cover up the word, so instead of centering it on the sign, I'm moving it over to the right a little bit. Now since there is a little bit of shine or gloss to this and I want it to look a little bit more farmhouse, I'm going to use some matte spray, and I am going to spray a couple coats of that on my sign, and that will help take a little bit of the sheen away from it. It's not so shiny. Once that matte sealer is dry, then I'm going to use my hot glue gun and just glue that sign onto the hoop. Next I'm going to lay out my greenery and my flowers onto the hoop and decide the placement of them, and then I'm just going to be attaching them with some pieces of jute twine. I think that will blend in well with my hoop. You could use zip ties or floral wire or any type of wire or string, but for this particular project I thought the jute twine would be a good way to go. I did leave the long ends of my florals and greenery sticking out. That will be the last thing that I do, is to take care of those ends, but I want to make sure that I have them all placed properly and that the ends are long enough that they won't just slip out after I tie them. So once I'm happy with the way it looks, I'm going to kind of fold those ends along the hoop and tie them, leaving about a 4 or 5 inch length of the stems, just so that I can tie it in a couple of places and it'll be nice and secure. And then I'm going to trim off the excess with some wire cutters. And I really liked how the twine looked wrapped around the center where my florals met right there at the sign. So I took another a little bit longer piece of twine and wrapped it around multiple times just to give it a little bit more of an accent. And then I tied it on the back and gave it a little bit of hot glue to secure it. My inspiration for this project comes from Wayfair's website. It is this windmill decor, and look at this, it's $109. I am going to be recreating it with Dollar Tree products for less than $10. I will be using these two Beware signs from Dollar Tree that I picked up around Halloween time. They also carry some that say love at Valentine's and then some others at different times of the year for different holidays. I also will be using one of these windmills from the garden decor section at Dollar Tree. And I'll be using one of these arrows. These are with the wall stickers, and they are adhesive on the back, and they come in a package of 3, but I'll just be using one for this project. Again from Dollar Tree, which actually I think everything I'm using is from Dollar Tree except for my paints, but I will be using 2 packages of wooden rulers for a total of 4 rulers. And I will be using 2 of these really long skewers. These are at Dollar Tree in the picnic or barbecue supply area, and they are about 3 feet long, and I'll be using 2 of them. And I'll be using some cardboard that I had around the house. You could also use foam board for this. First, I will be gluing my 2 Beware signs down onto the cardboard, and for this I'll be using some E6000 and then a little bit of hot glue just to have it adhere right away so I can keep working on my project while the E6000 dries. And as I glue these on, I am just lining up the edges and that center seam so that it's all nice and even and that seam down the center is tight. Next, I'm going to carefully use an X-Acto knife, and I put a cutting board underneath, and I'm going to just cut away the excess cardboard so that all I have are my signs with a cardboard backing. And the reason I'm doing this is because I think it just makes the sign so much sturdier. I've seen, and I've actually done it myself, where you just glue the signs together and use like some popsicle sticks or craft sticks to kind of support those. But I really like using foam board or cardboard behind them instead, and I can glue them to that whole board and make it a lot more sturdy. So once that's done, I'm going to paint this whole piece in Waverly chalk paint in the color Cashew, and then I'm going to be using some truffle colored and possibly some ivory colored chalk paint as well. And I only went over this with 1 coat of the cashew colored paint. I did have a few places where the sign was showing through a little bit, but that's okay because I'm going to be painting this so it has kind of a wood grain look, and so I was totally fine with that. So here I am just measuring the top part of my sign to figure out how far apart those little indentations are, and I'm going to mark those on the bottom of the sign so I can draw lines straight down so that I can make it look like slats of wood. And the reason I'm drawing my lines before I actually finish the painting on this is because I want to have an idea of where each board would be so that as I paint them I can make them a little bit different because I want the wood to look like it was the same type of wood, but each board is a little bit different. I don't know if that makes sense. So at first I tried using some of the truffle colored paint and I didn't like it. It was too dark and it had too much gray in it. I wanted a little bit more of a warmer look, so I actually painted back over this with some of the cashew colored paint, and I'm gonna start again. So I decided to use some Waverly acrylic paint in the color chocolate, and I'm dry brushing this on, and I'm doing each section at a time, so it's like I'm doing one board at a time. And I started out with kind of a fluffy brush, but I wasn't thrilled with the marks that it was making. It wasn't making the streaks that I wanted, so I actually got a little bit stiffer, wider brush to use like this, and it worked so much better. And I did some dry brushing with the brush flat, and then I also turned it sideways, and that gave a few different markings that made it look a little bit more like wood grain. And so I just kind of played around with it to get a look that I liked. So I'm going over the whole piece with this chocolate color paint, and then I am going to go over it with kind of a mixture of the cashew and the chocolate, and then I'm going to use a little bit more of the cashew paint and just keep kind of layering that on until I have a look that I am happy with. Now that I have it painted the way I want, I'm taking a yardstick and a flat thin brush, and I'm using some of that Waverly chocolate acrylic paint, a little bit darker brown, and I'm just lightly tracing over the lines that I drew with the pencil with my paintbrush so that it gives it a little bit more of a defined look where the separation for those boards are. And it's totally fine if these are not even. It's okay if the line is a little bit thicker in places and thinner in others, because that just makes it a little bit more realistic looking. So now I'm going to take my rulers, and the little measurement pieces are just plastic that are stuck onto the wood and they will peel right off. So I'm going to remove all of those, and it will leave a sticky residue. You can go over it with some sandpaper if you want to get rid of that, but that's the side I'm going to be gluing down anyway, so I didn't worry about it. I'm going to be putting one ruler across the bottom and one across the top, and they're just a little bit too long, so I am going to have to cut them off, but I am going to still have that hole on there. So what I'm doing here is I laid the ruler down on a metal ruler, and I'm filling the hole with hot glue, and you just want to hold it tight and let it sit until the hot glue sets up, and then it will pop right off of that metal ruler and leave a really flat surface where that glue is, and your hole will be filled perfectly. And that is the side that you want facing up so that it looks nice and neat. And you're going to be painting over it so you won't really see the hot glue. So I've marked on the ruler where I need to cut it off, and I am using an X-Acto knife to score that. And you could just keep using the X-Acto knife until you cut through the ruler, but I decided to use this little hacksaw from Dollar Tree, and I'm just placing a hammer handle underneath it just to raise it up a little bit off of the table, and then I'm cutting the little bit of the ruler off with the hacksaw. I'm going to be using these little mini craft clamps that I got at Dollar Tree in the Crafter Square section to clamp these on. I've measured about 3 inches up from the top and from the bottom, and that's where I'm going to be placing these, and I just want to clamp them on while I figure out my centerpiece. I don't want to glue them on yet. So this next part honestly was the hardest part of the whole project, was figuring out the centerpiece that goes diagonally across this, and just getting my angles cut right so that it looked nice. And what I ended up doing was I took a ruler and I drew a line across that center where I wanted one edge of that piece of wood to go, so that I had kind of a guide to follow. Now I think this would have totally been easier if I had had a piece of wood that went the whole length of this diagonal piece, but I didn't. I was using the 2 rulers. I'm using what I have, and so that made it a little more complicated, but I'm just marking kind of the line that I need to cut for the angle for this piece so that it can go up against that bottom piece, and then I will cut that so that I can put it on and kind of have an idea of where I'm going here. And really I just kind of did this trial and error. You know, it didn't come out to be like a 45-degree angle or anything, so it was a little bit tricky, but if you have extra rulers, that's a good thing, because I did end up having to use a 3rd ruler, or a 5th ruler, I guess, to fix an oops that I made. And then I basically repeated the same process for the 2nd ruler for that diagonal piece, just so I could finish that off. And if you get it lined up well, then you really can't tell that it is 2 pieces going across that diagonal, and it's going to be kind of behind the windmill anyway, so it won't matter. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's supposed to look a little bit rustic, and so just get it as close as you can. So now that I have those pieces cut, I am going to paint those using basically the same technique that I used to paint the main piece. Then I'm going to lay them back down onto my piece and just make sure they're all in the right place. And then I will use my hot glue gun and glue them down. And I did use the raised part of the ruler on the back, so that's where I'm gluing. It goes right down the center, and it actually gives us a little bit more dimension because it sticks up a little bit. And so that was what I decided to do. You can do it however you would like. So now it's time to make the windmill, and I'm using this windmill piece that I got in the garden decor section at Dollar Tree, and I'm going to remove the windmill part and just kind of separate these 2 pieces. And I did this by using some wire cutters, and I just kind of popped off that little center piece, but I'm going to keep that because I will be using it. And then I just pull the windmill part off. So next I'm going to cut my dowels to the lengths that I need. So I'm going to place the windmill where I want it on my background, and then just slip the dowel up underneath it, and I want this center dowel to go basically all the way down to the bottom of my back paneling piece. And I just used some wire cutters to carefully cut this because these dowels aren't super thick, so I didn't really need a saw. And I just kind of crimped down on the wire cutters and turned the dowel, and it cut it pretty easily. So I decided before I cut my other dowels that I wanted to get my arrow and get it prepped and make sure that I have enough room for the arrow before I cut my dowels. So these were in the wall sticker section at Dollar Tree, and they are just kind of mirrored finish stickers, and so they peel right off, but they're a little bit flimsy, and so I stuck my arrow to the cardboard backing that came in this package, and then I'm going to use an X-Acto knife to cut around this, and this will give it just a little bit more stability and make it not quite as flimsy. So if you're new to my channel and you haven't subscribed yet, I would love to have you stick around so that you can join in on future DIY projects. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and set the bell notifications so that you'll be notified when I upload new videos. So now I'm going to take some Waverly chalk paint in the color ink. It's basically black paint. You can use any black paint, and I chose that just because of the finish on this windmill, and I'm going to dry brush the arrow with the black paint just to make it look more like the actual windmill does already. And I purposefully left some of the silver mirror finish shining through so that it looked about the same. And I would highly recommend spraying this with a clear matte finish just because that mirror finish is really slick and the paint will just rub right off. So now that I have my arrow, I can figure out where I want the other two legs of my windmill to go, and I do make those just a little bit shorter than the center one, and then just cut them off with the wire cutters. Then I'm going to cut a small piece that goes across the top right below that arrow. Then I'm going to paint all of my dowel pieces with the black craft paint or chalk paint, and then I will dry brush them using a silver paint that I had on hand. This is a metallic silver, but you could just use a lighter gray craft paint as well. Now that the paint is dry on the dowels, I'm going to glue them onto the sign, and the longest one goes down the center, and I basically line it up with the bottom of the sign and just right up that center line. I'm going to attach it with some hot glue on the places where it touches the sign. Then I'm going to glue the windmill up at the top, and for this I do use some E6000 as well as some hot glue. I just felt like I needed that extra glue because the hot glue doesn't adhere to the metal really well. It kind of wants to just pop off. So I thought the E6000 would be the best way to go for this. Next I'm going to glue the two side dowels on, and I'm just making sure that they are even both at the top and at the bottom so that it all looks symmetrical. And once I have all three legs on, then I'm going to glue that little piece across the top and finish that off. Next I'm going to add my arrow, and I'm actually going to add it a little bit at an angle. Instead of putting it straight on so that it is only being glued in the center on that dowel, I'm actually tipping it so that the back of the arrow is touching the wood, and I'm going to put a little bit of glue on it. This does a couple of things. This gives it a little bit more stability, but it also gives it a little bit more interest and dimension. Next I'm going to remove the chain that was on that garden decor piece that we took the windmill off of, and then the little piece of metal that's sticking out that the windmill was on, I'm going to cut that off. So I'm going to use wire cutters. When you do this, you want to make sure that you are wearing something to protect your eyes because this goes flying. So just be really careful and make sure you protect your eyes. And then once I have that off, then I'm going to just place that on my windmill and attach it with a little bit of E6000 and a little bit of hot glue, Then I'm going to weight it down with a heavy book while that E6000 dries so that it's nice and solid. So apparently my camera was not recording when I glued on that little button part that goes back in the center of the windmill, but I just bent the little metal piece on the back around so that I could use it to put my glue on, and I glued that on so that it sticks up a little bit, and that was the finishing touch. And if you'd like, you can put a hanger on this so you can hang it on the wall. I would recommend gluing one on using E6000 or a strong glue like that. For my #1 project, I chose this lighted Merry Christmas sign because I got so many comments on this and it was just so easy and fun to make. I will be using this wood Mary sign from Dollar Tree. And 2 of these little wooden boxes. They look kind of like crates, and I found these in the Crafter's Square section at Dollar Tree. I will also be using 1 string of these silver wire LED lights and 1 spool of this red and black buffalo check ribbon with the white snowflakes. And I'll be using one of the winter or Christmas floral stems. So first I am going to paint my 2 little boxes using some ivory colored chalk paint. This is Waverly brand. I get it at Walmart, but you can use any acrylic or chalk paint that you have on hand. Then I'm going to use some red acrylic paint, and here I'm just testing 2 different shades that I have to see what looks best with the ribbon. And so I'm going to paint the whole Mary sign except for the reindeer in this red color, and getting on the sides of the letters takes a little bit of patience, but this is pretty easy to do, and I did have to put 2 coats of the red paint on. So here you can kind of see on the side of the reindeer that's next to the R, there's no line where his other ear and the edge of his antler is, so I kind of just drew it with a pencil so that it matched the other side, and then I'm painting around that line. And I did paint all around the edges of the word. I didn't paint the back yet because I wanted to make sure that I had enough red paint to paint the front of the word first. So that's why I didn't paint the back yet. Next I'm going to paint the reindeer in just a light tan color, and I'm just using an acrylic paint, a tan that I had on hand. You could use a darker brown if you'd like. Really, it's just whatever you want, but I wanted something that showed up well, and so this is what I chose. And I ended up painting the back of the sign using that same tan color because I didn't think I was going to have enough red paint. Now that my 2 boxes are dry, I'm going to use some wood glue and some hot glue and glue 2 ends together. So I'm just using the hot glue so that it will help hold it together while that wood glue dries. Next I'm going to take my string of lights and I'm going to thread them through the little handle openings in the box, And I do recommend putting batteries in these and making sure that they work before you put them in there and get them all glued down. I kind of figured out where the halfway point was on the string of lights, and then I just marked it with a Sharpie so I could have an idea, and then I thread it through the handles of the box, and I want to glue where that mark is, the halfway point. I'm just going to glue that in the center, and that way my lights will be evenly distributed. Then I'm going to run the lights along what will be the bottom of the box, which is actually the side of the box because this is going to sit on its side like you see here. And I'm going to run the wires along the bottom edge, and I'm going to secure them with a little bit of hot glue in a few places to hold them in place. I'm doing this because I don't want the wires to stick up and show through the word once we put the word on the front of the box. So here's basically what it's going to look like, and before I glue down the other side, I'm going to secure the battery pack to the back of the box, and that way I kind of know how long my wire is going to be. So I just glue a little bit on the edge there, and then I'm going to glue the battery pack to the back, but make sure that you glue it with the side that opens up so you can change the batteries in this. And I found hot glue's not enough really, and so you will want to use something like E6000 along with some hot glue to secure that. And then I'm going to go ahead and secure the wires on the bottom of the second box. And here is what it will look like once the lights are all in place. Next, I'm going to secure the word to the front of the box, and I'm going to put a little wood glue in some places, and then I will also use some hot glue to attach it. And the main thing here is to make sure the bottom of the word and the bottom of your box is flush so that it will sit flat. Next, I'm going to take that buffalo check ribbon, and on the bottom I'm going to attach it with some hot glue, and just make sure you press this down so that it's flat so it doesn't affect how your box sits. And then I'm going to wrap it all the way around to the other side and secure it there. I figure there's no reason to go all the way around the bottom because nobody's going to see that, and I don't want to waste the ribbon. Next, I'm going to cut apart my floral stem using some wire cutters, and I'm not going to use everything from this. I'm going to pick and choose. I think I'll use the greenery and maybe one pine cone and some berries just to embellish the top. Then I'm going to make a bow from that buffalo check ribbon and add that, and that's just the finishing touch that really makes that floral part look complete. And I decided there was one more little finishing touch that had to happen. So I took a berry left over from some florals that I had. I painted it the same red color that I painted the word, and then I glued it on the reindeer, so now we have Rudolph. And here it is all done. I think it is so cute, and it'll be really nice sitting on a shelf or a mantle or a table, and it looks good with the light off, and it looks good with the lights on as well. I hope you enjoyed my top 20 DIYs of 2020. I can't wait to bring you a lot more DIYs in 2021. And don't forget to check out that playlist for lots more top 20 DIYs from my friends here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a blessed day.